We're in the subject of lending, and we looked when we began the subject at some verses from Vayikra, from Leviticus. If your brother grows poor, lending is something that we learn about in a context of achicha, of your brother. If you excuse the gendered nature of this communication, I think we can assume this is gender neutral in terms of halacha. It applies both to men and to women. And the Pesukim continue, Al tikach meito neshech, you can't take interest. We looked at this verse, v'tarbit, and increase. Et kaspacha lo titein lo b'neshech, you don't give him your money on interest. There's a prohibition against lending to your brother, achicha, or your sister, if we interpret this as in a gender-neutral fashion, on interest. Now, but what about non-Jews? What about someone who's not Jewish, who might not be considered your brother? And when we go into Sefer Devarim, into Deuteronomy, so Moshe is repeating the Torah 40 years later, and the people are ready to go into the land. And we see many mitzvot are transmitted in a slightly different format in Sefer Devarim, in Deuteronomy, from the format in which they're transmitted in Shemot or Vayikra, in Exodus or Leviticus. And perhaps that's because the people are just about to go into the land. And as the mitzvah is repeated in Deuteronomy, it explicitly mentions the foreigner. Let's have a look at the words there. So now we're in chapter 23 of Devarim. Lo tashich la'achicha. You shouldn't tashich to your brother. Now, tashich is related to the noun neshech. It's a hifil, which means to make someone do things, to make someone do something. The translation is unclear, actually. Is it you shall not pay interest, or you shall not take interest, i.e. you shall not lend at interest? We're not quite sure. We'll see Rashi has a view. But the verse anyway says, Lo tashich, you shall not pay or shall not take interest, le achicha, your brother. And it continues in a very specific way, neshech kesef, so money interest, neshech ochel, food interest, neshech kol davar, of interest in anything that's payable. We've seen already that we're not allowed to create synthetic interest via financial engineering, and that this principle that no kind of interest whatsoever is permitted comes through very clearly from the verse in Devarim, in Deuteronomy. And the verse then goes on to say, La nochri tashich, you pay interest to a foreigner, ulachicha lo tashich, you pay interest to a foreigner, but not to your brother. And this is somehow associated with the ability of the Jewish people to live in the land. It goes on, L'man yivarechecha Adonai Elohecha, because so that the Lord your God will bless you in everything that you put your hand to on the land that you're going into. Somehow, if we're not generous about, if we are generous about lending without interest, somehow everything else that we do is going to be blessed and successful in some way. And I suppose the negative applies, that if we're cruel and we insist on lending at interest, everything else will, things will go bad. Essentially, that's what the verse is saying. Now, we couldn't translate it. Is it you shall not lend at interest, or you shall not borrow at interest? And Rashi, actually quoting the halachic midrash, says very clearly, Lo tashich azhara la loveh. This is a warning to the borrower, i.e. the borrower is forbidden to pay interest to the creditor. And then he refers to the verse that we saw. Ve'achar kach azhara la malveh et kaspacha lo titen lo b'neshech. You shall not give him your money on interest. That's the verse in Vayikra, in Leviticus, which we began with. So it seems to be forbidden to take interest and forbidden to pay interest, and they're separate verses. And the text is explicit about including any kind of interest, any kind at all. It's very interesting. The Torah Tamima on this verse quotes Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He's we know he's an extremist. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is the one who lives in a cave for 13 years. When he comes out after 12 years, his gaze burns things up. He's tamed actually by the experience in the cave. But he's someone. He's let's say he is an extremist, and he says, how do we know that someone who borrows a maneh from his friend, and he's not used to saying hello to him, he's not used to saying shalom to him when he meets him in the street, he's not used to doing that, that he's then forbidden from saying hello to him. If you borrow from somebody who you're not friendly with, you can't get friendly with him the next day. Talmud Lamar Neshech Kol Davar. The text says any kind of interest. Afilu dibur asur. Even speech is forbidden. The law is very, very expansive. We can't take or pay any kind of interest. But it only seems to apply to, let's say, our brother or our sister. And that's the mental state we have to have when entering the 6th Mishnah of chapter 5, which is where we're going to go now. Ein makablim tzon barzel miYisrael. We don't accept iron sheep from an Israelite. What are iron sheep? Iron sheep is a commercial arrangement where essentially I give. Let's say I give my neighbor a flock of sheep to take care of, and effectively I give it at a valued price, at an assessed price. In other words, the value of the sheep is cast in iron, it can't move. And then he's going to work on the sheep, and we're going to split the profits in some way. But I'm guaranteed to get my sheep, the value of my sheep back, and he can take the profits. And we've seen, by the way, that this type of financial engineering doesn't work. It comes under the category of interest because it looks as if I am lending him money and he's paying me interest in work to take care of my sheep. So we can't do that. And we know this already. So why? And the Mishnah actually concludes, mipnei shehi ribit, because it's interest. We don't contract this contract with a Jew because it's interest. So we already know this. Why does the Mishnah bring it? Because it's going to go on to make a distinction now. Aval, but mekablin tzon barzel min hagoyim. We can accept iron sheep from a non-Jew. We can contract this contract with a non-Jew. Velavim mehem, and we can borrow from them. Umalvin otam baribit, and we can lend to them at interest. V'chein ger toshav, and the same is true with a ger toshav. A ger toshav is basically a resident alien. He's someone who keeps the laws, right? So he keeps the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 commandments of the children of Noah. In other words, he basically lives in society like a regular guy. He keeps laws. He doesn't murder. He doesn't do idolatry. He lives with us according to the mitzvot that are appointed for the children of Noah, but he's not Jewish. And it seems as though we can still lend and borrow to him with money. And by the way, for all other purposes, he is basically Jewish. So we will, we will, for example, break Shabbat. I mean, this is a tshuva from Mulumdei Milchama, from Rabbi Nachum Rabinovich, the Rosh Yeshiva in Ma'ale Adumim, addressed to soldiers in the army. Do they break Shabbat to save the life of a non-Jew? And he says, absolutely, you do. A non-Jew in the land of Israel is considered a ger toshav. We treat them as Jews, but There seems to be an exception with regard to lending and borrowing. We can pay them interest and we can take interest from them. It's as if the rabbis understand the meaning of the time value of money. The lending regulations in Torah treat lending as an act of charity, not as a business transaction. Not as a business transaction. In a business transaction with a non-Jew, we can take and pay interest. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, Malvehu Yisrael Ma'altav shel Nochri Midat HaNochri. So a Jew can lend the money of a non-Jew with the consent of the non-Jew. In other words, and the example brought in the Gemara is, you've borrowed some money from a non-Jew, you're just about to repay it. Your friend needs a loan. You both go to the non-Jew. You say, look, here's your money back, but my friend over here, he wants to borrow it. So with the consent of the non-Jew, the second guy borrows the money, i.e. the Jew has facilitated the transaction, but it's carried out in front of the non-Jew. Aval lo midat Yisrael, but not with the consent of an Israelite. In other words, a Jew can't arrange financing between Jews and non-Jews. I mean, this situation where a loan is handed over from A to B, it has to be done in front of the lender. The money has to pass through the lender, is actually the way the Gemara puts it. Jews are not only forbidden from taking and giving interest in any way, even if it's just saying hello, but they can't arrange interest either. Interest somehow is something that we just keep a long way away from, both in terms of financial engineering structures and in terms of arranging.